If you're watching some video right now, you can see the T-shirt that I'm wearing. The Gator Hater T-shirts are out in full force this week. I know you had a good weekend. I know you've got your game face on. I know you're ready for Florida on Saturday. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about that here on DawgNation Daily this week. It starts with the Chip Towers coming up in just a couple of moments. And off the top of the show, a reminder of why the Florida game for Georgia is the one that's supposed to matter more than any other. It's going to be a great week and capped off by a really fun day, hopefully on Saturday in Jacksonville. We're glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I hope that you had a wonderful weekend, spent some time with friends and family. You know, we like fall Saturdays with Georgia football, but every now and then it's kind of nice to take a break from all of that, and I hope that many of you had a chance to do just that this weekend. But given the fact that you may have rested and recharged the batteries a little bit, I hope you've showed up here on this Monday with your game face on, ready to go against Florida on Saturday. If you're watching on video, you'll see me wearing my DawgNation Daily Gator Hater T-shirt. You better believe that I'm excited about the game this upcoming week and excited about talking to many of you about it here over the course of the next 5 days. And I thought it might be appropriate here on this Monday, leading into the Florida game on Saturday, to kind of revisit why it is that, for me, the Florida rivalry matters so much. Why it is that I believe that the Florida rivalry is the game for Georgia that's supposed to be more important than any other Georgia plays, both in terms of, hey, you'd like to win it, and, boy, you really don't like that guy on the other side of the field. And I guess as a way of setting up this conversation, it's probably appropriate to remember that Kirby Smart, at least what he said publicly, does not go along with me on this. Kirby Smart, what he said publicly, even though I like a lot of what Kirby Smart has said and done as Georgia coach, this is one point where I guess I probably feel a little differently than at least he does based on what he said in the past. Because leading into this game last year, and as a way of kind of setting up a conversation here today, I want you to hear this. Here's what Kirby Smart said about the Florida rivalry and kind of where it's supposed to rank among all the other games that Georgia's supposed to play and does play each and every year. Here is Kirby from a year ago.
We said before, there's 5, I think, states contiguous with Georgia, so they're all huge rivalries. And to say that one's more important than the other, I think that's unfair. I think when you say SEC East, you've got to rank those opponents first, because in order to advance, you've got to beat those teams. So those would be all 1As. You know, then you cross over to the West, and it makes it a little different. But this game's is big, and they're all big, not to say that one's bigger than the other.
So a couple things from what Kirby Smart says there. First of all, at the beginning of that, and talking about Georgia as a rival, or who Georgia's rivals are, he references the fact that there are a lot of states that touch Georgia. Georgia's kind of a unique college football institution in that it has a lot of rivals. And one of the things that I hear a lot over the course of the last year when I've made the case that Florida's supposed to be Georgia's biggest rival is people will say, well, let me tell you why another game means more to me. And I understand that individually. I do get that. You know, if you live up in Dalton or a lot of Georgia fans who live in Chattanooga, outside the state of Georgia, or you live in Rome, you're going to hate Tennessee. If you live in, Augusta, you're going to hate South Carolina. You live down in Valdosta, you may have special hatred for Florida because you're a little closer to Jacksonville. You know, if you live over in Columbus, LaGrange, somewhere like that, you hate Auburn a little bit more. I get why for certain individuals there are games that mean more, either because of who your next door neighbor is or kind of where you live and kind of what you deal with. I understand kind of where a lot of that comes from. I'm not talking about every single individual feeling exactly the same way. I'm talking about what the collective vision of the program is supposed to be. And I believe that the collective vision of the program, and this is important to remind ourselves of going into this week, is there is a game that means more than any other, and that is the Florida game, and it does provide you more opportunities than any other rivalry that Georgia has a chance to play, even though that's a little different than what Kirby Smart just said there. And the reason number one is, and one of the biggest reasons why we've done the Gator Hater Countdown every single day here on DawgNation Daily is because, as I said a moment ago, there is just more to gain from beating the Gators consistently than almost any other team that Georgia play on its schedule. Let me give you a couple of examples. The two other rivals that kind of show up alongside Florida on the minds of many Georgia fans is Georgia Tech and Auburn. Now, those are the three most commonly mentioned rivals for Georgia. When I say Florida ought to be the biggest rival to the Dogs, some people come back and say, yeah, what about Auburn? Yeah, what about Georgia Tech? But let me give you just a little bit of a stat here that kind of indicates why the Florida game, I believe, should take preeminence over those other rivalries. If you want to go back to 1990, that's not a year I picked arbitrarily. That's the year that Steve Spurrier became Florida coach, and the Florida program really changed. Spurrier down there in Gainesville said we're going to stop losing to Georgia, and by and large, that's exactly what happened. So that's kind of a line of demarcation in this rivalry between Georgia and Florida. largely dominated by Georgia before 1990, mostly dominated by Florida since 1990. So that's an important year to pick here. Since 1990, it's not just been Georgia that Florida's been beaten up on. Florida has averaged, if I did the math correctly, 9.56 wins per year every year since 1990. Compare that to Auburn, which has averaged just 8.15 over the same span, and Georgia Tech that's averaged just 7.33 over that same span. Now, both Georgia Tech and Auburn have won national championships since 1990, but neither have been able to match the year-to-year consistency that Florida brings to the table. So if I could give you the ability as a Georgia fan to wave a magic wand and say, hey, which team would you like to guarantee yourself a victory against every single year? Well, obviously the one that you would gain the most from beating every single year is Florida, because historically, Florida is just a better team than the other schools that Georgia would call rivals. There is just more to gain from regular wins against Florida. That's one of the reasons why the Florida rivalry for Georgia ought to matter more than any other. The other thing that you'll mention here is there is just something about a rivalry. When one side gets really good, it has a way of bringing out the best in the other side. And Georgia can't get this from Georgia Tech. The in-state school, Georgia Tech, just does not provide Georgia a lot of motivation. Yeah, Tech's going to rise up and occasionally beat Georgia, but when that happens, that's just a fluke, and the next year, normally, things kind of work out and go back to the exact same way they're supposed to be. I mean, Tech, when you look at all the ways that you measure major college programs, is barely a major college program. Doesn't do much in the way of recruiting, doesn't have much in the way of a fan base, doesn't really have much in the way of a national presence. It is the kind of team that can occasionally beat Georgia, but for Georgia, setting a goal to beat Georgia Tech does not accomplish much for the program. But beating Florida, on the other hand, because of the numbers that I just mentioned, gives you a chance to really raise the fortunes of the program. And as an example of how this can work out, look no further than, say, Alabama and Auburn. Remember how Auburn, Alabama was back in the 90s when Tommy Tuberville had Auburn winning every game in that series? And then all of a sudden, Alabama got so tired of the dominance of Auburn against Alabama that the response became Nick Saban. And Nick Saban struck fear in the hearts of Auburn, and the response to Nick Saban at Alabama was Cam Newton at Auburn. All of a sudden, Auburn's hoisting a national championship. And then Auburn doing that caused Alabama and Nick Saban to come even better, and then Auburn answered back in 2013 with an SEC championship on its own, and then Alabama may have squashed them for good, but there was some back and forth there along the way in the Nick Saban era at Alabama that really made both programs better. That's why I think college football teams should always shoot as high up the totem pole as they can for their biggest rival. And Georgia has a chance to challenge itself by proclaiming the rival that we want to pay the most attention to is the game this Saturday against Florida. The rival that we think has the chance to benefit the most is by enhancing the rivalry that goes on here with Florida. Much the same way it worked for Alabama and Auburn, I think it could work for Georgia against the Florida Gators as well. But there's also a final point to mention here. And this is something that Georgia fans probably don't like to say out loud, but every Georgia fan would admit is true. Georgia is just too good a program to have lost as much as it has to any one school, Florida included. That's just a fact. I mean, listen, on this program, obviously, we see the best in the Georgia Bulldogs, and we talk about the best in the Georgia Bulldogs. Obviously, I've got a great affinity for that program, but clearly Georgia at its worst is what's happened against Florida here over the course of the last 3 decades. Nothing good comes from pretending that isn't true. Nothing good comes from pretending that didn't happen. Georgia in the future, one of the prime directives I think this program ought to have is to correct that record against the Gators. Make it a big goal to say, hey, we're going to start stockpiling wins in this series the same way that previous coaches may have stockpiled some losses. It's another one of those reasons why the Georgia-Florida rivalry is supposed to matter as much as it does to me, hopefully to everyone soon. It's one of the reasons why I'm looking forward to seeing Georgia start to correct that record as soon as this Saturday. I mean, the bottom line for me is I think Georgia has to admit that it hasn't been as good in this rivalry as it's supposed to be, and admit that if it could have been better over the years, it might be hoisting a lot more championships. And 2017 is the perfect example of that. Georgia is in line to potentially be in Atlanta for the SEC championship and use the SEC championship the same way other SEC champions have as a springboard to a potential national championship conversation. But before it can worry or do any of that, it's got to take care of the Florida Gators on Saturday. It's a spot that Georgia's been in before. And this year, I think, it's a spot in where Georgia is much more equipped to handle what's coming for it. And speaking of that, I don't think Florida has any idea what awaits it in Jacksonville when the Gators arrive there this Saturday. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's great to have you with us here on our program today, whether you're watching us on Facebook. Of course, we're on Facebook Live at 10 a.m. each and every Monday through Friday on the DawgNation Facebook page. We're also on the radio at noon, every day on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We look forward to being with you there as we talk about all those folks in Athens and everywhere else around DawgNation getting ready to make their way towards Jacksonville and the Golden Isles of the Georgia coast, or maybe Amelia Island. Wherever you're going, we're glad that you're with us this week and hope you'll take us with you down there to Jacksonville later on the week. And, of course, we'll also post the show as a podcast for you on the world-famous DawgNation.com, on SoundCloud, iTunes, pretty much wherever podcasts are found, you can find DawgNation Daily. Now, we just told you why we do the Gator Hater Countdown every day here on DawgNation Daily. Let's now do that Gator Hater Countdown. We started it, just about 365 days ago. We're now down to just 5 days. 5 days from now, we're all in Jacksonville, those of us that can be. Though everybody else, they're in spirit, looking forward to seeing the Dogs beat the Gators and take the next step on towards what could be a very special season. And by the way, if you are there with us, we'd love to have you be a part of our DawgNation invasion to Jacksonville. Huge tailgate set up for us. It's going to start 10 a.m. on game day. We'll tell you more about how to find where we're going to be. It includes a Dixie Vodka tasting bar for those that are 21 or older. We're going to have 4 televisions set up. Jeff Sintel and I are going to be watching a lot of those early games with you there. And while supplies last, we've got brand new red Gator Hater t-shirts that we're going to be giving away to DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers there at our DawgNation invasion tailgate in Jacksonville. So if you're making plans to be there, starting at 10 a.m., hope you'll come on by and see us. We are in the touchdown lot. It's part of the Tailgaters parking collection there. It's near Gate 6, right off Bryan Street. That's where we're going to be. We'd love to have you come on by and see us on Saturday. And if you're in the Atlanta area, love to have you come on by and see us on Tuesday as well. One of our sponsors for our DawgNation Invasion is Marlowe's. They're hosting a big DawgNation Invasion big game preview for us. They're at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven from 6 to 8 p.m. That is tomorrow. 3575 Durden Drive in Atlanta is the address for the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. Jeff Sintel and I are going to be talking about all the action about what's going to be taking place on Saturday. Hope you'll be there for it. We've also got some special giveaways for you, including Marlowe's, who's going to provide a free appetizer with your entree purchase to anyone who comes dressed in their red and black tomorrow. That's Marlowe's in Brookhaven, one of the sponsors, of course, for our DawgNation Invasion. Another one of our great sponsors, our friends at R.S. Andrews. Moving into, rainy this morning, you're thinking about cold weather. Maybe your house woke up, you're a little cold. You want to make sure you get that furnace tuned up and ready to go for this winter. Make sure you trust my friends at R.S. Andrews. They're cleaned, screened, trained, and timely techs will give your system a thorough check. They'll make sure it's working well all winter long to keep your house nice, toasty, and warm. It's the guaranteed $99 furnace tune-up from our friends at R.S. Andrews. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. All right, we will have Chip Towers here coming up in just a moment. We'll talk to him about another trip for Chip down to Jacksonville. He's seen a lot of these over the years, and we'll kind of find out from him how he views this one differently than many of the others that he's taken over the years here as a member of DawgNation.com. That'll be fun with Chip coming up in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, obviously a lot of you, and by the way, let me also say this. We're going to do our Gator Hater roll call also a little later on in the show today. So a lot of you have been sending in your own Gator Hater memes, your own Gator Hater t-shirts, different pictures, different things like that. We've got some really funny ones we'll do today. Some of these are very funny. We'll do those with you a little later on in the show. But one of the things that a lot of you have also said to me kind of off the air a lot here recently, and in talking about kind of what's going on with the game on Saturday and kind of, what might be one of the themes, you've thought back and remembered, do you remember the Christmas commitment video that Jeff Sintel put together for DawgNation? There were a couple of these, but the first one in particular, when J.J. Holloman and Malik Herring committed to Georgia. And the theme of that video, for those of you that don't remember, was Richard LeCounte, Jake Fromm, the two leaders of Georgia's 2017 class, dressed up as Santa Claus, delivering some goodies to both Herring and Holloman to let them know that, hey, we'd like to see you be a part of this Georgia class. And the joke in the video was that neither Herring or Holloman knew that it was Fromm and LeCounte who were dressed up like Santa Claus. Well, many of you remembered this week, or leading into this week, what Jake Fromm asked Richard LeCounte on that video. Fromm wanted to know, when are we going to tell him it was us that was Santa Claus? And many of you remembered the terrific answer that Richard LeCounte gave to that. Let me let you hear it if you don't remember.
Hey, Richie, when do you think we need to let Malik and Jeremiah know what we did?
Probably sophomore year, Jacksonville.
After we beat Florida again.
Yeah, listen, I loved that from them. I was thankful that so many of you remembered that with me here this week because I think it speaks to one of the things that we liked about that recruiting class for Georgia, the leadership, their desire to kind of go out there and do great things for the program, and the understanding that great things for this program starts with a victory over Florida. You want to own the East, you want to play for the college football playoff, you want to do all those things here in 2017? Well, as we said a year ago, the next step towards doing any of that was beating Florida. That was a step towards the progression of being where this program wants to be. And it's kind of nice to think that Richard LeCounte might also agree with that himself, and maybe Jake Fromm too. In fact, it's those recruiting advantages that Georgia has over Florida that I think give the Dogs the biggest edge against the Gators next Saturday. So much so that I want to make that, Richard LeCounte and the other members of the 2017 class, the game-saving moment courtesy of Aldi here, the supermarket that saves you money. Why do I think Georgia's going to win next Saturday? Because I just think, or this upcoming Saturday, I just think Georgia's got better overall talent. And I think that talent gives Georgia a chance to save the game, really own the game that's upcoming Saturday. And, of course, it's all brought to you by Aldi, who reminds you that they have weekly fresh meat specials every Wednesday. When you see the sign, you'll find extra low prices on the very best cuts of meat. But hurry, because at these prices, the weekly supply is going to be limited. Aldi, simply smarter shopping. They bring you the game-saving moment each and every day here on DawgNation Daily. We appreciate you being with us here on the program today. A lot of fun, including a Gator hater roll call a little later on as we get ready for Florida on Saturday. But let's find out now a little more about the game as we get ready to welcome in Chip Towers. Great to have you with us.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And I'll get ready to say hello to Chip Towers here on DawgNation Daily. And we'll obviously talk to him a lot about the game against Florida coming up this weekend. There's a lot to hear from Chip about that. But, Chip, before we get to that, I actually want to go back to last week here briefly for a moment, because you were in Kennesaw on Thursday for kind of what turned out to be the final high school game in the career five-star quarterback and UGA commit Justin Fields. I guess, what was it like being there, and what was the scene around Fields when this injury kind of first started to unfold? I would imagine there were some tense moments close to the Fields camp when he first had to leave the game with an injury. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that was it was really interesting for me, Brandon. As you know, I went over there just to kind of get my first look at Justin Fields. I hadn't really planned on writing live that night. I wanted to get a look at Fields and maybe come back on Friday and just kind of, wax eloquent on what I'd seen from that young man. And he was impressive while he was out there, certainly. And the funny thing about it, I was actually standing right next to Kirby Smart on the sideline when Justin Fields came diving over there. If you remember from the television replay, he had got hit on the hand, and he kind of ran to the side and just kind of dove to the sideline. Well, that was just maybe about 5 yards away from Kirby Smart. So I left Kirby's side and, went over there to look, and he was obviously surrounded by cameras and everything. And it was a weird situation because Kirby, I'm sure, would like to have, turned around and gone over there and talked to the young man. But he couldn't, it's the recruiting rules thing. So he just kind of had to look on and get information where he could. And I came back and told him, I said, looks like a broken finger. That was disappointing. It's really disappointing for that program because, Brandon,
Sure.
what he means to the Harrison Hoyas. I mean, that's really, they had a tough road to hoe anyway, heading into the playoffs. They're always running into Region 1, so that's going to end them. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. It's a broken digit. They'll, repair it. He'll get well. It's not going to change his career arc in any kind of way. In fact, it may accelerate it a little bit. I don't know whether he's going to come in as early enrollee, but I know Georgia wants that for him, and maybe he can concentrate without having to really focus as much on getting ready for an opponent each week to getting ready maybe to moving on to Georgia.
What was the spectacle like? You mentioned Kirby Smart being there. I didn't even really think about the fact that he couldn't even go over and console Fields after the injury. But you're right. As a high school prospective recruit, he's not able to have that contact with him right now. But he does land there in a helicopter with Dell McGee to kind of see all that unfold. And there's obviously a huge crowd there. ESPN2 cameras. What was it like just being around the spectacle of that game, which in a lot of ways is a first cousin to the spectacle of Fields' commitment announcement a couple of weeks ago when there was also a helicopter involved.
Yeah, it was, and that was the wild thing for me. I got over there very, very early, and I'm really glad I did because it was a tightly managed, really packed environment. There were people parking miles away and walking into the stadium. I'd never been there before, but it was packed out on the Harrison side. The students were there real early, all dressed up and painted up, and it's amazing the transfusion of energy that kid brought to that school, which doesn't have necessarily a real strong football history. That was incredible, and you had the ESPN cameras all over the place, and Kirby comes in on a helicopter, and you barely even notice because they kind of parked a bit away. They wouldn't let him land on the baseball field because they just put new sod, which I was surprised, that Kirby wouldn't take advantage of that a little bit more. But yeah, it was a great scene. And then early on, if I'm looking at it from a critical eye, he certainly, I'm impressed with his ability to throw the ball. He runs it a lot, for Harrison, as you know, and he's kind of a one-man band in that regard. And probably there's some ball security issues there that I'm sure they'll clean up with him when he gets to college. I thought he was a little loose with the ball. He's had a lot of fumbles this year, and that kind of stuff, which is kind of common. They'll clean up all the fundamentals when he gets to Georgia. But definitely from an athletic standpoint, I was telling them, I said they ought to just club that kid up and put him at running back because nobody can tackle him for the most part. He's got great moves, big size, very physical, and his arm. I was watching him in warm-ups. He's got the arm. This is a guy that just needs to be refined and molded into the quarterback that I know that Kirby and everybody in the country thinks he can become.
Let me transition talking about the Florida game here for a moment. And, I've made the case over the course of the last year, including again today, why I think that Florida ought to be considered Georgia's biggest rival. In addition to the fact there's some history that would suggest that to be true, there's also a lot to be gained from beating a team like Florida consistently, given the fact that Florida consistently has been a really good sort of championship caliber program. Your opinion, though, Chip, where do you think that Florida ought to rank on Georgia's list of rivals? We all know this is a program that has a lot of them.
Yeah, I don't quibble about this. Florida's Georgia's biggest rival. And it's just because, it's because of everything that it encompasses. Number one, it usually decides the East. Even if Tennessee is involved in some way, or even South Carolina on the rare, ice age, year or whatever. But generally, it always has a major impact on the Eastern Division race. It always does. And obviously, Florida's kind of owned this series in the last 27 games, but of course that wasn't always the case. Certainly in the years before that, it was Florida that was always scratching his head like, how did we lose to Georgia again? So it's always a really important game. And then you have the factor, it's Georgia fans that carry the weight in this series. They're the ones that go down there and book the condominiums. They're the ones that go down there and bring all the money into Jacksonville. They're vested in this game. And certainly Georgia Tech, they hate them. And the old school Georgia fans, you'll hear them. Georgia Tech, that's all that matters. But look at the series. 15 out of the last 18 or whatever, and that's going to be a huge game if Georgia gets all the way through and they're unscathed at that point when you play at Georgia Tech. But this is the game that matters year in and year out to the conference. And then it's all those people that invest all that money. They go down there and party and have a good time, and they want to win. And so many times in the last 27 years, they've, trudged back to their, $500 a night condominium, dragging an L behind them, and they don't like that.
Yeah, let me actually revisit that subject since we're kind of moving into the week of the game here a little bit as well. I'm also very much in favor of the game being in Jacksonville for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned. Yeah, Georgia fans maybe have some bad memories of the trip back home, but, going to stay, as Larry Muntz was famous for saying, in Jekyll Island or St. Simon's Island. You and I are both very partial to Amelia Island, which is south of the Florida border, but nonetheless, these sort of coastal locations that Dog fans kind of hold themselves up in for a few days leading up to the game, I think that's one of the real special traditions in college football, and if there was ever a reason in which Georgia decided to let that go and turn this back into just another SEC game, home and home, I do think, Chip, something would be lost there. And I know for the Dog fans who are excited about making that trip, you'd be doing without what Georgia fans are looking forward to right now. Do you agree with that?
I do, Brady. This program is recorded, isn't it?
It is recorded.
Okay, so make sure that you get this. This game is never going to leave Jacksonville. It's never going to leave. There's too much. There's too much there. There's too much going on. The city of Jacksonville is invested in it. Georgia's invested in it. Florida's invested in it. Georgia and Florida keep this on a short contract basis. It's I don't know, whatever it is, 3 or 4 years. They 3 years maybe. I mean, they don't put it out very far, and there's a reason for that. They want to be able to leverage everything that they have going into the game. But Georgia and Florida both make more money from playing this game. The exposure that comes with it, that is the X integer that's hard to equate. This game is on CBS at 3:30 every year, and that's in years where both these teams stink, which isn't often, but sometimes it happens. But it's still because of everything, the history on both sides of the rivalry, Blue to Scott and all the Gators, great Gators teams, that you had in the 1990s. With Spurrier, I mean, it's just too big of a deal. It's never going to move. I think Georgia and Florida are always going to play that card, hey, we could go home and home, but nobody wants to go home and home in this series. Then it's just another SEC, rival, SEC home and home series, and it would lose so much of that flavor that it has here when it's played on the bank of the St. Johns River every year.
On the other side of this thing for a moment, looking at Florida, it's amazing right now how similar Jim McElwain looks to some of the other coaches that Georgia's already played this season and may face before the year is out. A lot of Florida fans feeling a little restless, I would say, after 2 straight losses. Of course, Florida was off this past Saturday, but consecutive losses before the bye week. The offense for McElwain's really not gotten any better, and that's supposed to be his forte. Brian Kelly was an embattled coach when Georgia played Notre Dame. He's since turned things around, but he certainly felt some heat before that game. Butch Jones at Tennessee kind of the same way. And right now, I mean, you find Jim McElwain probably coaching this game against Georgia on Saturday with a little bit of pressure. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. Well, it's interesting. I don't think anything's going to happen to Jim McElwain, certainly, this season or probably in the next couple of seasons, quite frankly. But, inside Gainesville, inside the Gator Nation, I mean, this is, you wouldn't think with a team that's, 2-time SEC Eastern Division champions, but, it's just kind of the eye test. It's just kind of everything that's going on. And then obviously this program is, completely mired in this credit card fraud, investigation. And that's, whether he should have known or what was going on and with all that. But having 9 players suspended has been a real black eye for this program. And I think the general feeling is that, Florida's kind of come out of the East by default the past couple of years, and there's probably some truth in that. But the bottom line, you got to do it, you got to get it done, and they have gotten it done and managed to get there. And this is kind of an interesting Florida team. I mean, you talked about them, coming off of 2 losses, and they are, but those 2 losses were by a total of 3 points to 2 pretty good teams. I mean, LSU is turning out to be all right. Texas A&M is turning out to be all right. They're not great teams, and certainly if you look at Florida from a statistical standpoint, they're very, very average, and that's what their record says they are, 3-3, and 3-2 in the league. So, Georgia is definitely the better team, but, in any given year, throw out the records and all that kind of stuff. But I'm like you. I mean, the matchups really suggest that Georgia should dominate this game, and that's the reason you got to, I think I saw 14-point, Georgia's favored by 14 points going into this thing. And those guys generally know what they're talking about.
So when the seniors, the big 4, Lorenzo Carter, Davin Bellamy, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, especially the 2 running backs, when they made the decision to come back to Georgia, there was this theme that quickly emerged of unfinished business. They wanted to kind of come back and correct some of the things that had happened to them in 2016. And I think when you start making a list of Georgia's unfinished business, there is nothing that you would put on the list ahead of Florida, given the fact that this is a game that Georgia's got a losing streak currently occupied in, and you mentioned the 3 decades before that. When you think about Chubb, Michelle, and unfinished business, this game against the Gators in Jacksonville's got to be near the top of their list, I would imagine.
It is, and that's why I feel good about Georgia going into this game, and really about what Georgia's doing this whole season. I don't think we could have known at the outset exactly what things were going to look like, and certainly we were all guarded in our optimism about Georgia, knowing those areas that they needed to get better in, all of which they have shown significant improvement in. So there's a reason that Georgia is where it is. But I think exactly what you're talking about, the four seniors, and I would throw Aaron Davis and Dominique Sanders into there. This is a strong senior leadership group, and even to some extent the juniors on this team. And, they came back because of what happened against Tennessee last year, because of what happened against Florida last year, because of what happened against Georgia Tech last year. And I think these guys, when it comes to these opponents in particular, are, extremely focused and motivated. And I think that's a big reason why, I don't see any kind of letdown or oversight. I think Georgia's going to be laser focused, and certainly Nick Chubb. He's had some decent games. He hadn't had great games. Georgia, in fact, this is a great stat, I think, Brandon. I just ran across this one this morning, so you'll be the first I share this with. In the last 3 years where Georgia has lost to Florida, they have 8 rushing first downs. In 3 games, 8 rushing first downs. So it's like Kirby talks about all the time. There's nothing fancy about football. It's about running the football and stopping the run. And if you do that, you're going to win the game. Georgia hasn't done. They haven't been able to run the football like Georgia is built to run the football. And look at that 2014 game when I still don't know what happened that game.
Yeah.
It's incredible that they run for 400 and something yards. Georgia's going to come in here. Nick Chubb is going to come in here. Sony Michel, a Florida native, just foaming at the mouth, I think, to show that they're the better football team and they're the more physical football team. I don't think Kirby's going to let anything short of that happen.
I'm keeping you late. Let me squeeze in one quick final question. Kirby will speak to the media again today. My guess is when he speaks, based on what he said on Tuesday, we'll find out that the bye week probably came at a pretty good time for guys like Trent Thompson and Terry Godwin, 2 guys that had been nursing injuries. I'm expecting Kirby to provide good news on them today. Is that your expectation as well?
I think so. He may play it, more for what he can get out of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Kind of, he may, we're not sure about Trent, but I think I mentioned this to you last week. I watched Trent, skip off the field after the Missouri game. He looked like he was feeling really good to me, and he's out there running around in practice, and Godwin was too. Though we only got to see him Tuesday of last week. We'll see out there today, but I do think that Georgia is pretty much at this point all hands on deck. With the exception of Natrez Patrick, who's not going to make it back, and that's too bad. But Reggie Carter now, listen, that's not a small thing. If he can, if he can get back on the field, that's a big deal for Georgia's inside linebackers, and I expect him to do that.
Hey, Chip, it's always great to have you here on DawgNation Daily. Looking forward to a lot from you here leading into the Florida game on Saturday, including your coverage from Jacksonville, and we'll hopefully talk to you on Monday again as well, right here on the program. Thanks so much.
You got it, man.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff from Chip Towers there. Of course, looking at the Florida game, the injury situation for Georgia, kind of everything in between. And by the way, Scott Harris in our comment section brings up a really good point. We're talking about Trent Thompson and Terry Godwin. You heard Chip also mention Reggie Carter there a little bit as well. Another one of those names, and this is a guy that when Kirby spoke on Tuesday, I don't believe he said that David Marshall practiced, but Scott Harris said David Marshall's also one of those big names to be aware of for Saturday, a guy that did leave the game against Missouri 2 weeks ago with an injury, and that's right. Or didn't even play in the game, Didn't even play in the game because of an injury, and that's exactly right. Scott is all over that David Marshall situation because Georgia, and I know Seth wrote about this over the weekend, that Georgia pass rush has just not kind of been what it's supposed to be. Marshall's one of those guys, as I'm talking about as of late, over the last couple of weeks, probably hasn't been what it needs to be, what it could have been, and Marshall being back at full health against Florida certainly gives you a much better chance at getting after Felipe Franks. And I think that storyline of how much havoc can Georgia wreak in the backfield against Florida and really put some pressure on Felipe Franks with a big-time pass rush, I think that's an important part of that game on Saturday, and I do think that David Marshall would contribute to that. By the way, somebody else in the comment section, then we'll get on to our SEC through. Somebody else in the comment section mentioning the job opening now at Georgia Southern after Tyson Summers loses his job over the weekend. And I know that Seth Emerson wrote in the forum about the possibility of Dell McGee maybe emerging as a candidate there. I'm obviously, like many of you, I would view that as terrible news if Georgia were to lose McGee, given the fact that he's been such a big recruiting impact on Justin Fields, on Zamir White, probably on James Cook as well. He's been a big impact on all those guys. That'd obviously be a huge loss. I hope that Georgia can find a way to keep him in the fold. And it's kind of funny, I talked to somebody else the other day about the chances that Tyson Summers ends up working at Georgia next year. He's a guy that does have a good relationship with Kirby Smart. It'd be nice to add Summers without losing McGee. I guess that's the point that I'm trying to bring up there. I'll also tell you that DawgNation Daily is brought to you in part today by our friends at MyBookie. Make sure you check out MyBookie, the sports book known for the fast, no-hassle payout when you win. And even better than that, they've got a special offer for DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers. Right now, you get your first deposit matched up to 100% if you use the promo code DawgNation. That's DAWG, DawgNation. Check them out online, mybookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid, and your first deposit can be matched up to 100% if you use the promo code DawgNation at mybookie.ag. All right, few SEC stories I want to get to here. Alabama obviously throttles Tennessee on Saturday, and I think Tennessee's making a huge mistake by not firing Butch Jones right now. That's not because I have, blood in the water and call for every, single coach to be fired. I try not to be. That can come across as sounding a little bit tacky. I mean, imagine if somebody was on some blog right now covering the Facebook Live podcast industry and saying, Brandon Adams ought to be fired. BA ought to be out of a job. That wouldn't feel very good if that person was saying that about me, and I don't lightly go into saying that about a college football coach, even though sometimes that can be kind of an easy knee-jerk reaction thing to say. But in the case of Tennessee, it does seem obvious that program ought to be able to do better than Butch Jones, even if Dog fans don't want to see Tennessee do better than Butch Jones. It ought to be the case that they are able to do that. And, right now it's just not happening. But as Mike Griffith wrote at SECCountry.com over the weekend, that, if he wins out, he might be able to save himself and keep his employment. But is that going to be good enough? I mean, is that good enough for Tennessee? Another 8-4 season, another kind of mediocre season. Georgia fans would love it. Georgia fans would love the idea of Jones going 8-4 and keeping his job. But if I were to sort of speak objectively here for a moment, the fact that Georgia fans would love that is an indication of why Tennessee probably shouldn't do it. And on the Alabama side of things here for a moment, another example, we'll talk more about this on AT&T SEC Country Live later on today, but another example of Nick Saban really just kind of being loose and calm and relaxed with his team. Even the halftime interview where he sort of playfully got into it with Allie LaForce, the CBS sideline reporter, it shows you a guy right now who I think is feeling pretty confident. And, in some ways, his demeanor actually mirrors a little bit of what you've seen from Kirby Smart, who I think has been described at times as sort of a more fun-loving version of Nick Saban, maybe a younger, I don't want to say hipper necessarily, but maybe so, version of Saban. Well, Saban, I think, has tried to emulate some of that himself here this year, and I think you see a guy right now who's probably pretty confident in what his team's doing. Yeah, he'll kind of get on him from time to time, and he'll get on reporters from time to time, but overall, I think Saban's feeling pretty good about himself. Let me hit a couple other SEC stories here real quick. So LSU goes out and kind of keeps rolling on Saturday. They get another convincing win over Ole Miss. This is a game which I thought Ole Miss had a chance to win it. Shea Patterson does leave the game with an injury. But you got to give credit to LSU here, who a couple weeks ago looked like a disaster of a program after losing to Troy. But they have absolutely fixed things as of late, beating Florida, beating Auburn, convincing win over Ole Miss. Ed Orgeron's looking like a pretty good coach at the moment. I'm not sure that stays that way. I'm not sure that narrative maintains where it is right now, but for now it's looking pretty good. Auburn also blows out Arkansas, so clearly whatever was wrong in the LSU game is not going to afflict them the rest of the season. They kind of bounce back and get a nice win there. And let me also say this kind of away from the SEC, at least for a moment. I mean, partially involving the SEC, but kind of away from the SEC here. How about teams that Georgia beat earlier in the year going out and getting blowout victories themselves on Saturday? Notre Dame in Notre Dame Stadium, a venue taken over by Dog fans earlier in the year, but the Irish were dominant against USC over the weekend. Very impressive win there for the Fighting Irish, and really bolstering Georgia's playoff resume, assuming that becomes a legitimate conversation month of November. And not to be outdone by that was what Mississippi State did to Kentucky. So teams that Georgia beat, in the case of Mississippi State, convincingly got convincing wins on Saturday. that can only help Georgia. And by the way, the first college football playoff ranking announcement takes place next Tuesday on Halloween night, and Georgia's expected to be right in the thick of that. We'll make that your SEC through. All right, as promised here, before we kind of wrap up our show and close out our show, want to sort of pay some credence and some thank yous here to members of our Gator Hater roll call. Now, a lot of y'all know that nobody dislikes the Florida Gators more than me, and nobody believes this game matters to Georgia more than I do, but I'm not the only one who feels that way, and that's kind of the purpose of the Gator Hater roll call, to show some love to some other Georgia fans that dislike the Gators. And if you want to be a part of our Gator Hater roll call, hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. Show me a pic of you wearing your Gator Hater t-shirt, just like I'm wearing mine on the show today, or your own Gator Hater paraphernalia, whatever you've got. We'll put you up here on our screen, including our buddy Bassin Dog, who's just a what do you call it? Photoshop wizard. He's got our Gator Hater t-shirt in his tweet, but he's added to our license plate logo kind of a silhouette of the guy who looks like Jim McElwain on the shark. That is a very creative thing from our buddy Bassin, and a absolutely worthy inclusion in our Gator Hater roll call. Joshua Campbell also giving you a couple of memes. Jim McElwain saying Gator Hater football is back. Donald Trump saying fake news. Listen, I don't care who you voted for. That's just funny. John Gluck has a funny meme here. It has a couple of them. One of them I'll read. It says, it's a sad Gator fan, the saying, said, if I wanted to see a team play this bad, I would have gone to Tennessee. Pretty funny stuff from John Gluck. A really funny Gator Hater roll call entry. Here's Jamie Bailey, who's just a terrific DawgNation Daily listener and viewer, who's apparently at Halloween dressed up like a Gator fan. He's got his orange shirt on, big long mullet in the back. He's got kind of a Gator visor with a pretty funny stuff from him. You got John Lee here, who sent this in from on the Gator Hater roll call. His son looking forward to his first trip to the world's largest outdoor cocktail party this Saturday. He's in the swamp with the thumbs down. John's son is there inside Ben Hill Griffith Stadium. You love that from John. That's an example of raising them right there. Take your son, if you're in Gainesville, to Ben Hill Griffith. Let him do the thumbs down, the boos. Love that from him. How about Justin McGee, another Photoshop work of brilliance here? It says UGA's got 99 problems, but Florida ain't one. And it's Kermit the Frog sipping a Georgia coffee mug with a little tea sticking out of there. And that comes all the way from Fernandina Beach. By the way, Fernandina Beach is going to be red hot this week. A lot of Georgia fans plan on descending to the First Coast there for that. Justin, thanks for sending that in. Steve O'Mac, also a really funny one here. It says yellow is the new orange. This is just in time for Halloween, by the way. He calls it the hashtag Jim-a-lantern. Now, many of y'all have kind of made fun of Jim McElwain for what you say have somewhat of a yellow hue to his teeth. I won't make a comment about that. But if you're watching this on video, you can see, and you got to check this out on Facebook Live if you're just listening to the show right now. It's a flashing light GIF here of McElwain, and it goes to dark like a jack-o'-lantern with just the teeth highlighted. Some of y'all are just not right. And this is an example of kind of not being right in a way that I can show. Some of y'all sent some things in that I cannot put on the air. We know we don't have FCC restrictions. We are, at least on the podcast and on the Facebook Live. I guess we do on the radio. But nonetheless, we're still sort of a family-friendly show. We want people to be able to listen with their kids. Some of what y'all sent in, Gator Hater credentials are obviously well established. It probably just doesn't quite fit with the theme of our show. But if you haven't gotten in today, hit me up at DawgNation Daily. We'll get you on the Gator Hater roll call before the end of the week. All right, as we wrap up again now for real, you heard Chip Tower say this a moment ago. Georgia, I guess, opens 14-point favorite over Florida. I heard a couple different numbers. One spot I think I had it 13.5. Somebody else went up to 14.5. 14 seems to be about the, I guess, the median number here for the moment. And I also, did I read this correctly? Georgia hasn't been this big of a favorite in this series since 1985. A staggering number to think about, and an opportunity for Georgia kind of go out there and do something big against the Florida Gators. As many of you have said in the comment section, not just get a win, but maybe get a convincing win, and I understand kind of where that sentiment comes from. For me, a win is a win, and that'll be enough to kind of correct this, at least for now, and move on to the next phase of the season for the Georgia Bulldogs. But I am definitely looking forward to talking to you about it every day here on DawgNation Daily. We'll have some special guests. We'll do a lot of look at what it's going to take to win the game, and we'll just get ready to have a great time in Jacksonville on the weekend. We'll see you then right here on DawgNation Daily. And for those of you with us on video, we'll look forward to having some comments from you right now. By the way, I noticed in the video as I was kind of toggling back and forth on Facebook Live here, that for a long time we were kind of like sitting right on 666 viewers, like 666, and I was thinking, well, we got to have somebody either log off or somebody else log on here pretty quick because we need God on our side going into Saturday. We certainly don't want to tempt fate on that. So I thought it was just kind of funny for a little while there. It was like 666 right there on the live viewers theme. So good to know that we got off that number. Of course, we appreciate so many of you tuning in here on a video here today. All right, so let me hit some comments here. Nate Thomas calling for a big Georgia win, 42-13, he's saying. Tim Tatum says, we haven't gone to Jacksonville with a team this complete in a long time. Offense, defense, special teams. Tim, that's a very good point. Wayne Folan asking about the "We Want Bama" chant at the Penn State game on Saturday. Yeah, that's kind of funny. You know, that thing kind of pops up, and a lot of the folks who've wanted Bama as of late haven't gotten their wish, haven't gotten what they wanted from Bama once they played that game. Hopefully Georgia, and it seems like the Georgia players for the most part are kind of good on this front. Hopefully Georgia will continue to let its wins do the talking and will want Bama when it's time to play Bama as opposed to looking too far ahead of the SEC championship game. Shane Guy says, coming to get my Gator Hater t-shirt on Saturday morning. Shane, looking forward to seeing you there for that one. Appreciate that. Excited about all of you who are able to come out to our DawgNation tailgate on Saturday starting at 10 a.m. and really excited about giving away a lot of – these are going to be red. It's going to be the exact same thing as this. Well, we'll put DawgNation Invasion Jacksonville on the back with some of our sponsors who are paying for these T-shirts to provide us the opportunity to be able to give these away. But it'll be the red T-shirt with the black Gator Hater license plate on the front. So that's going to be really cool. Jeremy Barbary says, any possibility UGA pulls offers for lower recruits? Well, you know, so here's the thing. Jeremy kind of touching on the numbers for the Georgia recruiting class, and are all the guys currently committed going to have a spot in the class when it's all said and done? I mean, I think that this is one of those things where if you're a recruit, both a committed recruit or an uncommitted recruit, I think one of the things that you're looking at is, hey, do I feel at home at the place where I'm going to go play? And part of feeling at home is an opportunity for playing time once you get there. I think there may be a few Georgia recruits. I won't speculate as to who they might be. That wouldn't be fair to them. But I think there could be a few Georgia recruits who thought Georgia was going to be the best place for them. But when you look at the depth of who they're going to be bringing in at their position, all of a sudden they realize, you know what? The chance for playing here is not what I thought it was. And I don't fault a kid for wanting to play. I don't fault a kid, and that for me works both ways. If you're at a school and you decide you want to transfer, I understand where that's coming from if you're not getting to play. And if you are going to be a part of the signing class, but you think better of it at the last minute because, whoa, they're bringing in a lot of guys that play my position. And, you know, sometimes we glorify the kids who want to go out there and compete, but there's one thing about to compete. There's another thing with just having such a log jam that you're not likely to rise to the top of that. I don't fault the kid for making the best decision for his future before he goes into that. So there may be a Georgia commit or two who rethinks his place in this class, given the numbers that Georgia's probably bringing in. And I don't think that those guys should be criticized if that's indeed what they do. Richard Smith says, you're going to sell any T-shirts at the tailgate. Richard, thanks to our sponsors, and we've got some great ones for our DawgNation Invasion. Marlowe's and Kroger, R.S. Andrews, Dixie Vodka. Because of them, they've made it possible for us to give these T-shirts away. It's a really cool thing. It's $25 value. And, you know, our sponsors said, hey, we want as many people to be able to have these as we can get. So let's put our logo in the back and we'll give them away. And that's a really cool thing for them to do. I'm really proud of that. Really proud to be able to provide that on Saturday as well. Nate Thomas says this will be the best fourth quarter ever. He means the fourth quarter of the season. It certainly could be. Joe Ramey, to that same theme, says, keep chopping that wood. Go Dogs. Agree with that. Ro Hawkins says, do you think a lot of recruits will be watching this game very closely? So, Ro, here's the weird thing. Georgia and Florida aren't really going head-to-head for that many recruits. They almost never do. This year may be another example of that. I guess the one guy that is potentially sort of a head-to-head battle may be Tyree Johnson. Am I thinking of anybody else that could have been a head-to-head? I mean, I guess Fields was kind of at one point, but I don't think anybody ever, you know, really considered the likelihood that he might go to Florida. He did visit Florida, but it was really that visit to Florida back in the summer that had a lot of folks crystal balling him to Florida State. So, you know, Florida grabbed onto Corral pretty quickly because, you know, they saw the opportunity to kind of, you know, latch on to the guy that wasn't getting the same level of attention from Georgia. So I think that recruits have been watching Georgia very closely in terms of wanting to see wins on the field, and another one of those on Saturday just sort of more firmly establishes that this is a program that's not just building momentum in recruiting, but building momentum during the season as well. But in terms of the choose between Georgia, choose between Florida, I mean, am I leaving anybody out? Is Tyreek the only guy right now that may be choosing between Georgia and Florida? Frederick Dubose says extra large for him on the T-shirt. The T-shirts are going to all be extra large. That's just kind of the best way to satisfy the biggest number of people. So they will be extra large T-shirts. Jeremy Jackson says, any information on the South Carolina television time for next Saturday? That should come out today, right? Isn't that right? We should find out about the South Carolina game time today, I think. I think that could be today. Terry Crews says this week's game with Florida is where the culture change is a chance to go from talk to reality. Boy, Terry, that's a good point. I don't always believe that Florida has won in this series because of some sort of cultural problem with Georgia, although at times maybe Georgia was guilty of just not having the mental fortitude necessary to go down there and fix what had ailed them against Florida. But if Georgia goes into a stadium that's caused it so many problems in the past and gets a nice, convincing win on Saturday, or really any kind of win, then yeah, that does give a whole new voice to the idea of this truly being a culture change for Georgia. That's well said. Scott Crisler says, should hear about the game time today unless the 7-day rule is invoked. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. So I guess we do know. Aren't I right about this? That Gary Danielson let it slip on Saturday during the Alabama-Tennessee game that the Alabama-LSU game was going to be in prime time. And that is the same day as the South Carolina game. So I guess 3:30 against South Carolina is an option for Georgia, right? What's the rest of the SEC schedule looking like that day? Georgia coming off a win against Florida, 3:30 game time against South Carolina. I don't know who South Carolina plays this week. Another loss to them might hurt the CBS audience a little bit. But you're starting to feel like you got a chance. You may have Auburn, Texas A&M that same day. I don't have the schedule memorized, so I'm probably not completely getting all of that right. But you may have Auburn, Texas A&M. That might feel like a pretty good 3:30 time. Some of y'all that's got that schedule open. Let me see if I can pull this up. Pardon me while I type. Let's see if we can take a look at the schedule. All right. Let's see if I can pull up Week 10. All right, Week 10, here's what you got. You do have LSU, Alabama, and I think Gary Danielson let that slip. That's going to be a primetime game. So that means the 3:30 spot's going to be open. It's like a doubleheader day, I believe, for CBS, which Georgia and South Carolina could be a part of. Auburn, Texas A&M does play that day. That'd be your competition. And, Texas A&M's a big market. Is there a chance that Auburn, Texas A&M's more attractive for CBS at 3:30 than Georgia, South Carolina is, given the weakness of South Carolina, relative weakness of South Carolina? That might be true, although I would say that there's still a chance that Georgia, South Carolina could pop up at 3:30 on that CBS spot there, given the fact that the Alabama LSU game is probably going to be at prime time at night. Jason Daniel also kind of agreeing with that as well. Let me scroll up and get some more. Alvin Todd saying that could be a CBS doubleheader day. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking a little bit too. Justin Heyer says, so when will we wear black this year? Well, the one thing we know is that it's going to come in a sort of early announced manner. It won't be a surprise, and we do know they're going to wear them. Now, I thought the perfect time to do that would have been the Missouri game at night a couple of weeks ago, because many of you did not like the black jerseys during the day game last year against Louisiana Lafayette. You thought they looked better at night, which that makes some sense, and that's why I thought they would have worn them during the Missouri game. But as some of you also pointed out in the comment section, the problem with wearing black jerseys against Missouri is that Missouri is also a team that has black as a part of its color scheme. So Georgia, I guess, and that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if that's why Georgia didn't wear them, but that's a reason not to wear them, because Missouri's going to have the black helmets on, and I guess the black pants there as well, which would also maybe think you don't do it against South Carolina, because South Carolina also uses black in its color scheme as well, which essentially just leaves Senior Day against Kentucky as the day that Georgia would wear the black jerseys. Somebody else also mentioned that they like the black better in November as opposed to October because it's a little cooler, a little more of a fall time of year. You don't want to wear black during a hot game, which kind of makes some sense. So I would say that the most likely option is the Kentucky game to close out the season. Justin Grant says it'll be against Tech. You could do it. Tech's almost for sure going to wear white at home, although if Tech got wind of the fact that Georgia wanted to wear black, Tech would probably wear, I don't even know whatever alternate uniform they have. So if Tech figured out that Georgia wanted to do that, they would definitely probably try to play a game to keep Georgia from doing it. Jason Daniel says, BA, we could be number 2 in the country when we play South Carolina. If Penn State loses to Ohio State, we beat Florida, which is highly possible. Yeah, Jason, that's exactly right. That is a real possibility for Georgia to be number 2 by the time this weekend comes to an end. Julie Craig also thinking Tech for the black jerseys. Buck Brinson says, just don't wear them against Alabama, which a lot of Georgia fans who remember 2008 might remember. Scott Crisler doesn't like the black jerseys, which is a very common conversation back and forth on this program when it comes to stuff like that. Willie Gray says Tech's got the dark blue. They may, pull something like that out. Dalton Scott says we need to throttle Florida and put in the committee's minds that we're taking no prisoners. Separate ourselves from the pack, make it impossible to leave us out. Dalton, that is one of those things that does lead us into a conversation about next Tuesday. And I am curious to see if Georgia's rank in the college football playoff top 25 reflects its rank in the current polls, the AP and the coaches poll, because one of the things you're going to see happen over the course of November is this conversation, I think, intensify around the notion of could 2 SEC teams make the playoff? What if Alabama and Georgia are both undefeated going into the SEC championship game? Could the loser of that game get into the playoff as well? And I've been a believer that's a very, very difficult thing to see happen because I think the playoff was designed to prevent 2 teams, and let's face it, this is 2 SEC teams, 2 teams in the same conference playing for national championship. I think the playoff is sort of a defense mechanism against that. But you're going to see something this year happen that's kind of strange. Notre Dame, I think, is a legit playoff contender right now. And Notre Dame's not in a conference. Yes, they do have an affiliation with the ACC, but they don't play an full ACC schedule for football. That's not an ACC team. If Notre Dame were to make the college football playoff, then you've knocked another conference champion out of the playoff. You're already going to have 5 conferences, 4 spots, so there's always going to be one conference that's left out. If Notre Dame makes it, that's a second conference champion that's left out. And to make that situation more difficult, you've got the likelihood this year of a lot of 2-loss conference champions. The Pac-12 may be a 2-loss conference champion. Right now, Washington State both have losses, but I still think, even though it got beat up bad against Notre Dame on Saturday, I think USC is still the top team in the Pac-12. So you could have a 2-loss Pac-12 champion. Right now TCU looks to be riding high, but this is not some dominant TCU team, at least in my mind. I think you could have a 2-loss Big 12 champion. Remember, there's a conference championship game for the Big 12 this year, which is to say, who knows what happens in the Big Ten right now. As someone mentioned in the comment section before, I still think that Penn State gets heavily tested by Ohio State on Saturday. So what if it is one loss, either Alabama or Georgia, whose only defeat came at the hands of the SEC champion? Let's say that's a really close game. Can you imagine the debate around should that team be in the playoff, giving the SEC a second playoff team over a 2-loss conference champion that's probably not going to have nearly the same resume, and as someone who talked about the convincing Georgia wins, not nearly the same level of sort of eye test pizzazz. I want you to be paying attention next Tuesday. Assuming Georgia gets the win over Florida, I think Tuesday could be interesting to kind of see where Georgia is in relationship to all these other potential teams, and the idea that some of those teams ranked below Alabama and Georgia could leapfrog Georgia at the end of the year because of the committee's ridiculous assertion that conference championships matter more than just 4 best teams. It's going to be a really, really interesting debate, and I think we're going to be all over it here on DawgNation.com. Cale Cobb says a lot of analysts already saying that a 1-loss SEC team will make the playoffs. Cale, it's one thing for an analyst to say that, but we have to acknowledge in 3 years, while last year, a non-conference champion, Ohio State, got in over a conference champion. So we've seen a non-conference champion make the playoff. We haven't seen yet a non-conference champion be included with a conference champion from that same league into the playoff, giving essentially half the playoff to one conference. We haven't seen that yet. That's the kind of thing I think the committee would try to avoid at all costs. But we'll debate it, we'll watch it, and we'll see how it unfolds. Of course, the next step towards doing that, though, is to see Georgia get a win against Florida on Saturday. We're going to talk about that every single day. It's going to be a fun week here on DawgNation Daily as the Dogs get ready to go to Jacksonville, beat up on those lousy, stinking Gators, and we can't wait. See you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily.